The Lord be with you. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who have given us the gift of Sabbath. Help us to be present to you and to one another as you are eternally present to us. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Good morning. Good morning. And it's great to see all of you here this morning. Hell was popular, but perhaps Sabbath can also be popular. So the question is why? Why Sabbath? Why do we talk about Sabbath? One, it is commandment, but why is it important for us to speak about Sabbath today? And why now, since we've talked about hell, wonderfully we talked about hell, and we decided that hell doesn't exist. Or, as Bill so wonderfully helped us to understand, particularly in looking at the writings of John and Paul, that eternal life, heaven, begins even now. So how is it that we experience, how is it that we come to know and grow into that reality that the heaven that we anticipate in the future is already available to us now? Choosing Heschel's book, Sabbath, which was written in 1951, so nearly 75 years ago, these ideas, where he's struggling himself with what he's observing around him and within him, that busy technological society, and it seems that there's never enough time. There's never enough time to do the things that we feel that we need to do or want to do. And how is it that we get out of that trap? How do we get out of that bind that seems that there's never enough of the time that we want, because our activities within space, he calls it, occupy all of that time. One experience as a rabbi, as a scholar of the Jewish faith, about the commandment of Sabbath. Book, as you've been reading, he explores what it means to live a life of Sabbath. Sabbath coming from the Hebrew Shabbat, meaning to rest. So what does it mean that it is to have a day of rest? The rest of our days when we're more occupied with the things of space, as he says. So this tension between time and space recurs, as you've experienced in this book. And where do we spend our energies? Introduction, this isn't simply a religious issue. It isn't a particular religious issue. Recently I've read a couple of other books, The Lion Trekker's Guide to Life, and Jacob Needleman's Time and the Soul. And they're all trying to answer that same question. How do we live within the rush of time? And thinking about Heschel back in 1950 experiencing that, how about us in 2024? In 2024, we've got mega computers and online and internet and social media and all those things that are pulling and pushing at us, impacting our lives day in and day out. Many of us can remember that on Sundays when we were growing up, it was still a day of rest. You couldn't go by the soccer fields on a Sunday morning and see gatherings there because they weren't allowed on a Sunday. That was respected.
Blue laws, remember blue laws?
Yeah. And I was thinking in 2004 when I bought my Harley, it was from 𝗦𝗘𝗏𝗏 up in 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏, and they were open 6 days a week, but not Sunday. And on their, they were not open on Sunday. That was not a day for business. What we're going to be doing in these 3 sessions today, in October and in November, is explore these ideas that introduced to us by Heschel of time and space. And how is it that we find, what can we find as a way of appreciating a time which is larger than the time that we experience in our days, or maybe another way of saying, how do we experience the timelessness of time within time? I was thinking this morning of early experiences of that, and one of my first week when I was in seminary, there was a priest there who was a great cook. He was Italian, he was American, but he studied in Italy, and he took on cooking as a great thing, and he invited me to as a group of other students, to meal. And it was a wonderful experience, the cooking. And I wish it when you can have a good conversation and good meal and just experience. Way of living, you don't have to eat in 30 minutes. The whole evening can be spent over a meal. Things do not need to be rushed. You can simply be there and not be worried about what comes next. And as Heschel will tell us, that those are intimations of eternity. That even now, when we find those things where you say, where did the time go? It seems like we just got here. Those are the intimations of what heaven will be. Just a hint about what it means to live in timelessness. I've come to learn a few things over those years. And in my last congregation, it was a congregation formed by a priest who understood liturgy. It was John Olson. He taught liturgy at 𝗦𝗘𝗥𝗘𝗢𝗦, the seminary in Claremont. And these were people who, years by his understandings of what it was to give things time, not to be rushed. And so I inherited this congregation that wasn't in a rush to get out of there. And being Episcopal, we only had 2 services, and they were far enough apart that you didn't have to worry about clearing the parking. Being a Roman Catholic priest, that was one of the concerns, that if you preach too long, you're going to back up the parking lot and the pastor's not going to be happy. So we're going to be exploring these Heschel and our own experiences of what it is to live life with some sense of timelessness, the spacious time in which we can enjoy and really experience the depths of our being, not just the things that we need to do. We can be human beings rather than human doers. You've probably have heard that expression before. It's more important to be a human being than a human doer. Get off the treadmill of doing. So Nancy and Bill and I are going to facilitate this, but this is meant to be a conversation among us all, because we've all had experience of our own struggles with time and our own ways of dealing with those struggles. So let's take a look at what Heschel has to say in his prologue. What I've listed here are just a number of quotations out of the book, which I thought were salient things that we could unpack with one another. And so as we referred to earlier, he begins his, one more thing. A grandson of Heschel, even though I never knew him. Because a person I did know, who I consider to be a father of mine, was Jim Sanders, who was also a father to Bill, one of the scholars. And Jim and Abraham Heschel were friends and colleagues at Union Seminary and back in New York, particularly when Heschel was on a visiting professorship at Union. Jim used to talk about their conversations that they would take over time, and I was able to contact Susanna Heschel, who was Abraham and Sylvia's daughter, who teaches at Dartmouth, and talk to her about Sabbath. So I feel like there's some other connection here that has inspired me to look more seriously into Heschel's writings. So on with Heschel. So on page 3, he says, technical civilization is man's conquest of space, or human beings. He uses, of course, language that was acceptable in 1951. That so much of our time is how do we find our ways of living in space? We've got to establish a place to live. We have to have food. We have to have clothes. We have to get along with one another, and so that takes a lot of energy, a lot of time, and so we sacrifice our time by conquering space. And even with all of the advances that we have, just think of all of the conveniences that or so-called conveniences of appliances that do our laundry, that do our dishes, that think of the computers that we don't have to spend all this time typing or printing out things or using carbon paper to duplicate. All the things that technically are much easier for us to do now. Yet we seem busier than ever. You know, when shops were closed on Sundays, people shopped on 6 days of the week. Now we can shop 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by clicking a button. So how do we? So there's no problem conquering space right now. We've done that, but it hasn't helped us in a great deal in terms of how we live our lives day to day and our sense of well-being.
Can I add a footnote?
Please.
And by the way, this is an open forum, and that's really helpful because everybody comes to this subject with their own perspective, and the perspectives need not always line up. But just on this point, one of my favorite perspectives is the big picture, the big historical picture. You'll love this. The history of human culture is behind a lot of this. Let me tell you, there's a certain sub-tribe of the Ute Indians that were in the Nevada, Utah area. A remarkable group. This is pre-Columbian, before the Europeans arrived. They had as close as you're going to get to zero culture. Okay, they really built no shelters. They wore no clothes. They almost never hunted food. They were gatherers. And they existed this way for quite a long time. And what they had lots and lots of was time. Lots of time. Okay. And what they had very little of was culture. And by culture, I simply mean technology and the things that we craft to live human life. Well, they lived a human life with very little culture, but lots and lots of time. Now you can see as we go forward in time that the more culture you create, the more technology, the more engineering, the more textiles, the more maritime science, you see this goes 1,000 different directions, the less time you're going to have because time is being devoted to the creation and maintenance of culture. Okay, so this is, we've just wrapped up the history of human civilization right there, but the point that I want to make in adjunct to this about our hurried lives is, this explains to some extent our current situation that we all instantly recognize when Richard speaks these words, and that is we don't have much time. Well, that is I submit, a direct reflection of where we are in the development of culture. There is so much, I'm just using technology as a catch-all word, not just electronics, but all the things that we craft and create and manufacture and maintain and throw away. There's so much of that in our lives. Well, think about it. When you first got that smartphone, you had to learn how to use it. That was time taken from you to learn this new technology, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. And think about your daily life now, how much of it is taken up by the demands of the tools that we've crafted to make our life easier. Now, here's my point. That is not going to do anything but get more intense. Scholars have studied this, and they've even drawn a hockey stick diagram of it. And it started back in the, actually when Heschel was writing this book, things technological, it's a confluence of a lot of circumstances, resources, computers, and so forth, started escalating things exponentially. I mean the development of technology, which means the development of culture. And that is, when I say exponentially, it started going up, and now it's just this upward racing spike of the demands and the creation of technology. So my point is, this is a lesson we are wise to learn, because it's not as though, well, if we just wait long enough, it'll get better. It won't. Think of how many of us, we work to make sure we're on the same wavelength with our grown children, technologically, because they're more used to it. And they have to work at keeping up with their children. We all recognize what I'm talking about? My message is, let's see if we can open our hearts to a way of dwelling in rest, because the world is not going to do that for us. On the contrary, we face a significant challenge, and our children, our grown children and their families do as well. I just wanted to add that footnote.
Thank you, that was wonderful.
One more. When I was working in Africa in the rural bush with women, and I would ask them, can you be at this place at noon? And they'd show up at 2. And the very tribal, very simplistic culture. And I would complain, and they'd go, oh, you Americans. You know, they'd point to the sun. We have time, you have the watch.
Yeah.
And it was really an awakening thing for me. It's like, okay, I'm in their place, in their time, and, you know, bring a book to read. They would show up, but I thought it was really amazing. Family, tribal, you know, Sunday was a day of rest. So I love that. I think of that often, you know, time or time.
Interesting.
That reminds me of something that Heschel said that I think is interesting. It's actually 2 things. One of them is you were not created for the Sabbath was created for you. But then in a later page, he says, you are in the Sabbath is not in you. And that reminds me of what Reverend Cindy just said about the sun. Like, you know, we want to have time on our watch and time on our phone, and because we're not in control, we want to have it be our time, manage everybody else's around us time. And it seems like this book is pulling us to say, okay, there's time. It's outside of you. It's there for you to experience. You don't own it.
Exactly. That idea that the Sabbath isn't in us, we are in the Sabbath, is a way of talking about the idea of the architecture of time. That time is a place that we can enter and be present within, but we don't own it. We can't control it, but we can be there. And it really means that we have to stop thinking about how it affects us. I mean, in the sense that we're the center of the story. Mm. That somehow it's how it impacts me that matters. That I often say that God's project for each of us is to move us out of the center of the story. Because we all have stories. We all have experiences and histories and the way that we want things to be and the things that we enjoy. But what we are asked to is see that there's a much larger story that we're all a part of. And it's the experiences of our life that can help us to move out of that center and enter a much larger, much richer, much fuller experience of what it is to be a human being, and human being in community with one another and with God. But it requires that we're willing to let go of our own ways of thinking and being, and not be in the first way thinking, how is this affecting me? Why is this important to me? That there's a larger picture that we're meant to be considering with one another. And that's what Sabbath is about, is that it's about matters of the soul, which are common to all of us. That this is soul time, and we'll explore Heschel's ideas on soul. And we talked about soul in the Hell series. We're going to talk a lot more about soul, particularly in this, because soul is something which is beyond space. It's within space, because it's within us, but it's not confined to space. But it is in time, because that's what remains. Well, and this is where language is tricky.
Right.
We talk about eternally meaning outside of time, and yet we're bound by, that's what life is for us, is within time. So.
I have one comment though, with
Yes, right.
technology, we have 3 children that are iPhone Gen Zers.
Right.
They were born with the technology. It's so easy, they don't even think about it. It's just there.
Right.
And so with advances with technology, you're not going to need to know anything, regardless of your level of your ability or IQ. It's just automatic.
Right.
My kids, when they were 4, could pick up an iPhone and you how to work it.
Right.
So the technology has gotten to that point. And if you, like, physics always gives me a headache because of, and especially with time relativity, if you really get into laws of physics and everything, there's a lot of explanation for things. And with the Sabbath, with time, and even how the author talks about labor versus working, and even like the workers on the Sabbath, we're nice to each other. You know, it just kind of, these things kind of happen. So it is interesting how there are some things I think innately just in us. And technology is one with the advancement. It's like with AI today, it's amazing. I pretty much can write down in 5 minutes what I want to write, what used to take me 5 hours to write an article,
Right.
and it's done in less than 10 minutes.
Right. Right.
So now what happens with that time? And again, the time time is kind of interesting. The older you get, the faster it speeds up because it's all relative. Time of relativity, physics, right? So to my children, an hour is a hell of a lot longer, a lot longer than it is to Jim and I. Because we've been on this earth for over half a century.
Right.
They haven't.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting, the whole thing with the Sabbath. And it's interesting too, I like why in the Jewish faith their Sabbath's on Saturday, the Christian is on Sunday.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And the reasoning behind that.
There's reasoning behind
Yeah,
it.
I know. That's why I was waiting to see if people would realize why that is. So now, because of that, in general, when you're a mixed society, you get Saturday and Sunday off. If you were to observe both Sabbaths,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
In the West.
yes.
So, the ritual of the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath, perhaps our gathering here on Sunday is our ritual to refuel, to fill that light. There were some wonderful references to the light that it, but in my grandchildren, your children, I don't know how much of they have in terms of actually gathering with a faith community for that type of refueling. So for me as a grandmother, finding rituals that nobody would, other than I would call a ritual, would be those times when we come together and just eat together and have that closeness that it's hard to get with the kids. And I even watch them with their families. I mean, we always sat and still eat together. But my young families, the parents will sit and eat together, but the kids might even be off on their iPads. So I'm sending them articles, and I'm careful not to. But there's something about that ritual that may not be as refined, and I don't know what word to use other than refined as, our liturgy or, the Jewish Sabbath, but that's That's what I believe the soul needs. I'm not gonna get my grandchildren to church. I mean, but I want them to learn to find ways to Sabbath. And it's gotta be in some really simple things. Looking in the sand, looking at the beach, looking at the trees. I mean, it might be some of those ways. That can be Sabbathing, I think.
I think it'll come back. Our children actually went to a Hebrew Jewish preschool, so they learned how to make halal. They went through all that, knew the halal. They knew the prayers and everything. And then we, went through the Episcopal. They were confirmed. Jim and I were married, Episcopal church, and we said as long as you make it to confirmation, which was just a year and a half, then it's up to you. Well, now how often do you see that church with us? Christmas and Easter. That's it, right? And unfortunately, we planted that seed. Now, as Pastor Cindy always tells us, hopefully it'll come back in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
We will see. But we kind of gave them a diversity of faith to look at things and choose. And there are a lot of similarities, but with the Sabbath, they like to take it as a day kind of a sleeping in. But with sports and everything in the schools, there's no recognized Sabbath anymore in any schools. It's gone. And it's up to the family. And to get your children to eat with you every night, it's really difficult.
And there are other rituals. I mean, I even see it on the soccer field. I mean, some of these, at the end of the game, these 10-year-olds go by and to me, that's a ritual. That's a recognition. I mean, but maybe I'm just searching, but I really do believe in this day and time in culture that it's got to be, for me, it has to be some of these rituals, I want to call them, that are not under the guise of religion, or particular faith.
Mm-hmm.
We had, when Arch and I were growing up, sports became a thing on Sunday. And our son played Little League and all that, and we just wouldn't let him play. We weren't like pulling a chariots of fire card or anything, but we just said, we go to church on Sunday, and you have a church family,
Right.
and we do things on Sunday that are not sports. So, and for the people who have decided to throw practices for games on Sunday, we just have to say that's not who we are. And our children bucked at first and said, well, that's just not fair. And then they began to understand it, and they began to take a closer look at the church family. So it made a difference, and as they got older, they said that they really appreciated that because they could develop that relationship with their church family. The kids in sports were the kids they saw in school. So it wasn't as if there was a different community there. So, they seem to understand that. So.
I was just thinking, it's so absurd if we really do believe that time doesn't exist outside of this earth experience. And how ironic it is that we're all running around with these constructs that we created in our head. And I don't remember which one of you made the comment that the Sabbath is in us. Are we in the Sabbath?
We're in the Sabbath, it's not in us, we're in it.
Right, so the reality is if time doesn't exist, we're already in our eternity right this second. We're in it now. It's not like we're going to start eternity when we die. We're in it now. We've always been in it.
Yep.
So how silly are we running around in our eternity with all these little obligations and schedules and things we have to do, playing sports on Sunday, and how silly one of us would look plucked and put into heaven the way we envision it, living that life. Like I feel like it is our it's our big goal to figure out how can we live Sabbath now, like how we can be Sabbath now, because this is our eternity right this second. We're not going to start it when we die.
Right. Yeah, that's Heschel's thesis, actually. Yeah. And its strong resonances with the basic Christian message, which is the church is a foretaste, the gifts of the Spirit, the presence of the Spirit in the church is a precursor or a preview of the age to come, which puts the spotlight on how we conduct ourselves, because our lives are to be an indication of the peace and the harmony of the world to come. But on the subject of, I appreciate what you're saying about the sports, and some kind of, if we want to call it doesn't have to be a ritual, but it does have to be a rule, some kind of policy. And I'm referring to, we had the good fortune of living a fair amount of time in the state of Israel back in the 20th century. And You all know most Israelis, Jewish Israelis, are not necessarily religious, but they're definitely Jewish. But the state law is Sabbath is no work. There are very finely tuned exceptions for the functioning of the country, obviously. But this was something that was new to us, where, okay, it's Saturday, let's go. Do what? Nothing's open. Not even the buses are running. Okay, so you can't go anywhere and do anything. It is I don't want to say it's a rest, but it is a pause that is imposed upon the country. And at first, remember, it was hard to adjust to. But then by the time we had finished our life in Israel, and we're coming back to California, we wanted to continue doing that. We thought, this is so good, because it really does impact you, not even necessarily religiously. Existentially, it just kind of impacts you, and you are given a time to be with yourself and to be with each other, apart from some project, apart from some task. And we found it, we tried, but when we got back here, for us, because we're not part of a Jewish community, which also observes the Sabbath and observant families, that's just not our social world. And we found, remember, after a while, we just stopped trying to carve out a Sabbath time for ourselves. And this is something that I could be done better, I think, in Heschel's book. He was speaking more about existential issues, which is profound, and I learned a lot. There's very little of the social dimension in his book. He doesn't talk about the being together, which is what happens by, this was your point, which is centrally imperative in the whole Sabbath concept, is it's a pause. No, we don't do that, because this is our time together quite deliberately. Yeah, so thank you for that.
It's interesting, though, when you have been to Israel, the difference between here and Israel, just because of what you said. They do pause, and we're so busy we don't, even though we try. But it's very interesting, because you have to see it to believe it. But again, on Saturday, everything is closed. The only people that are kind of getting around is the Muslims, and they're in the taxi cabs.
Yep.
But at 5 o'clock at nighttime, it's the craziest thing in the shuk. Every store opens. I mean, it's really magical, and it's magical to see the pause, but then see everything. Immediately open up.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I think that's really awesome, and I try to do with our kids too, is that we force them to eat together and to be together on Sunday. Though they used to hate it. But today, I see their families, and they do the same thing, and that's a blessing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because that family time of being able to talk and not be on your phone, it's the most important thing. And when my kids were growing up, the technology wasn't nearly what it is today. I don't know if anybody's gone to any restaurants lately, but it's quite saddening to me to see mom, dad, kids. I mean, everybody should be having conversations together. They're all sitting and saying one thing, and they're all on their phones. To me, I mean, from my upbringing, oh my goodness, I would have been beat if that would have ever happened. But at the same time, it's just, I think that the technology has become babysitters. And we've just taken that a little bit too far. And like Randy was saying, I mean, for us to write a paper, I mean, it took 6 weeks to write a paper. And with AI today, it takes, 20 minutes. So again, our level of time and what our kids' levels of time and what I see today is my grandkids. And it scares me because, I mean, my kids never did what my grandkids do. And I was just with them last weekend, and I thought, Destiny, you gotta get off that phone, honey. And then she just looks at me like, Grandpa, what are you talking about?
Coming from another world.
So it's just very interesting where we're at right now.
And by the way, notice that when we say, now it only takes 30 minutes to write that paper, as though we have now more time. Well, we don't. It's just filled up with other stuff. Yeah.
More papers. Well, you're expected to do more. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
We're giving you this extra time. Now you need to do this, that. We're going to run with a skeleton crew, so there's smaller amount of people doing what we're used to. So, how do you make sure there's enough for everyone to do that? In the future, what we do to keep everyone busy. What are they gonna do?
The thought might be nature pours a vacuum.
Yeah.
When we were growing up, we would say, see the computer start developing and everything, you think, we want all this free time. No, I do 10 times the stuff you're doing now, and God forbid you get sick for a couple of days.
Right.
Then it just is a monster pile
That's worse.
up.
We're doing much more.
It's also, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, fundamentally, that's the problem, is that we need free space, and instead of being the way we were created to be, we've got this agenda that we think is above our beingness. So we just check our boxes and do all our stuff, but we're not being in Sabbath as like our existence.
It's also the commercial creation of recreation. There was no recreation really. I mean, I'm not gonna try to take on the historians here, but historically there was not the concept of recreation. There might be sporting events for the rich, but there was no organized recreation, and that's something I think that really came up in the 20th century. And now there's this whole focus on organizational recreation, which people consider rest, but it really isn't.
In the early 20th century, we had a farm, and the farm never stopped. So
Right,
you did not have time to have recreation.
David?
I just wanted to make an observation regarding the use of phones with little ones. Is a lot of parents are driven crazy, and they're trying to find time, and so they give their kid a phone, and to distract themselves. But it seems like that's also robbing that child of time and their ability to find it when they get older, because all they know is distract yourself with the technology, and they don't develop a sense. It's harder to develop a sense of time for themselves and to hold it.
It is amazing how easy it is to get kind of swept away in all the distractions, and I think this is where the need for a rule is. It's hard to put the brakes on by yourself, or you need a support, because it's like you're in a tsunami and everything is just pushing you forward, and when you feel like you're stuck like that, then you need the organized recreation that feels like a support, and you feel like you can't take a stop. I used to not come to church because I worked on Sundays, because I felt like I had to be ready for Monday. And that is now, in retrospect, seems crazy. Like, I've made more time for myself by taking Sundays off. But my email box is filling up today. I'm just not checking it. And that's, but, and if I didn't have a community of people that were also not doing that, I would feel like I wasn't, I think you can feel like I need to stay on top of this wave. And so the kids can pick up the phones, but they don't know how to stop the wave, and they're all freaking out. They're having a hard time.
So
Sorry,
interesting point.
Tamara.
I almost didn't come today because I'm working on weekends. I'm working in the library tomorrow, and I thought, how ironic that I'm going to take off
Yeah.
on the Sabbath at work. But I wanted to comment to what Dana was saying. I think I'm so glad you said that, because I've never thought of it the way you just said it, that we're not teaching our children. They're not going to be able to find time. And I get to see that because I work at a K-8 school, and it's a Catholic school, and I also work public. And most of the public schools, middle school, all the kids have phones. The other day I was talking to the 6th grade class, which was like 35 kids, and I said, how many of you have a phone? Because I wanted to tell them about an app that they could scan books with, and only 3 kids raised their hand. And the difference that I see on the playground is with those kids who know how to find time because their parents have raised them in a way where they're not filling their time with technology, is the kids at my K-8 school, second it's recess, they are running, and they are talking and laughing and playing, and they're all over that playground. They don't even stay in an organized game. Sometimes it's a game, then they shift here, and then middle school, public middle school, where they're all connected. Those kids are pulling and ripping out their illegal phones everywhere and doing TikToks and texting each other and sharing information. And when you said that, I just like rolled all these, tapes in my head of what I saw physically with those kids.
Tara?
The hockey stick image really sticks in my mind. It seems like the faster we run, the behinder we get. And trying to keep up to, I like to read. I've got a pile of books I want to read, but people keep writing. They just keep coming out. I'll read one and then somebody else, and everybody's written another one while I'm doing that. They write it faster than I can read. My picture of heaven is being able to just sit and read at my slow pace forever. And if everybody goes at once, there won't be any new books. I'll be able to catch up on all of them.
Oh, man.
On the schooling and the iPhones then, so the high school minded children go, they're not allowed to have their phones during the class. What a difference this year has made. Our governor is supposed to sign by 2026, no classrooms in public schools. So let's hope that happens because there is a big difference. It's very distracting, so I'm glad that the high schools are at least figuring that out. And the public schools by 2026, they will not allow the phone. They have to give the phone up when they walk into the classroom. And it does make a big difference because it's very distracting.
Now, do they have to have any phone, or do they have to give up all their phones?
No phone, no phone.
No phones,
Doesn't
period,
matter what
okay,
it is.
because
You have a
sometimes
flip phone,
Yeah.
you're gonna give it up. You have a
any phone you
iPhone
have on
16.
your person.
Any phone goes in a little pocket, you get it
Gotcha.
after. And it makes a difference, especially with our middle son, it's really helped.
Yeah.
So he's going from F's to A, so just 1 year, that's all you need.
Tara?
Well, wait, I teach pre-K, and we don't know, so 4-year-olds, and they're very poor this year. But you actually don't want them that really to be on technology for very long, and I totally understand it is a babysitter when you need it, like, I'm not judging. But it's bad for their brains, you want them to be bored and to like not self-stimulate, but like be able to figure out things to do, because if they don't figure out how to do that, like long-term, the social skills, that, how they react to people, writing things on their Instagram, like they're not learning like the skills. So it's super important. I know it's easier, but good for their brains to not always be on a device, because it teaches them those kind of things.
Yeah, because we socialize them into a pattern of life where they are never, ever alone with their thoughts.
Right.
Okay? So if you are conditioned from that young age, or even an older age, if we're conditioned so that we simply are not accustomed to, which means skilled in being alone with our thoughts, we are dependent on these devices for our time to even pass. This meets all the qualifications of an addiction. I mean, this has been studied. You take the phones away, they really go through a kind of withdrawal and so forth. So it's a very serious problem. And in terms of rules and the farm life, just a textual note, the Sabbath laws in ancient Israel were instituted in an agrarian society. I mean, the farm never rests. But the rule was there. And the rule added, the Sabbath law in Moses' Torah, adds the qualification saying, and also your farm hands, and also your animals. There's just this rule which in cases it encompasses everyone in the observance of this time off, if you will. Because what's the temptation? Oh, I'll rest, but Jose will get the work done.
Right.
And the Bible says, no, Jose gets the day off too.
Right.
Yeah, there's also a problem, not only being alone with your thoughts, which I think is good, but how being alone with your neighbors.
That's right.
I mean, you're waiting in line at the checkout counter, you used to chat with the other people in line,
right.
But now everybody's got their phone, and there's 35 seconds here, I can redeem that. It's easy. So we lose some of the social skills.
Right. So this is truly soul work that we're talking about.
The bell has rung.
Oh, yeah.
So we need to go. So just a couple of things.
Yes. Oh, it's okay. I was just going to say that really robs us from ourselves, too. Like, when you think about, oh, the computer will write the paper or whatever, it's robbing you from the paper you would have written or the time you would have written. And this is something that happened even with printed books. And, you know, like this idea of you can read at your pace, because this idea that we have to know extensively instead of intensively is an external idea. And you know, there's a line where he says, you know, 6 days a week you're worrying about being successful, but on the Sabbath, whether you're rich or poor or whatever, you are welcome into this eternity because it's you. This is part of you.
Thank you, Nancy. So a couple things. So we're talking about the architecture and time. That's what you're Patsy talking about, and how do we create these time possibilities for connection? So that and it's about attending to the soul. That's what we're talking about. This is all about how we attend to the deeper parts of who we are as human beings within the depths of our soul. We have opportunities this morning when we attend the service to attend to our souls. One note about the liturgy. The opening prayer, the collect, that the priest says, when you're invited to pray, God be with you, you see, I'm also with you. And then there's a pause. It's not because the priest is waiting for, not knowing what to do. The pause is intentional. The pause is intentional because all of us come into any space with preoccupations. What we need to do later in the day, what the week is going to bring, what's going on in our families. We've got all sorts of things going on within us. And that time to pray is to say, I surrender for this time. I hand these things over for this period to God, to care for. So that I can be present. I can be as present, as fully present as I can be with those who are here in this space. So when Reverend Cindy invites us, God be with you, and also with you, whatever within us, say, I hand this over. I set this on the back burner for now, so that I can be present in this time and space. Okay, that's one. Second thing is that we share time afterwards. We eat, we visit, and those are that's wonderful things for us to be doing, because that's attending to our souls, and that's why we stay. And I just think it's important that we recognize that's what we're doing. This is soul space that we're entering and taking care of, and that's what Sabbath is meant to foster within us. Look forward to next month. Today's been great.
Yeah.
I think, but we didn't get through much of the notes.
Okay.
But they're there. They're there just to, I consider these to be the salient points to refer to, and they are expanded in the text. But these are the ones that I think are the highlights that really are Heschel's idea, his argument about the importance of Sabbath. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you for your contribution.